AOC she was having a conversation with the young woman. I'm not sure where it was at, but she did a brilliant takedown of Ronald Reagan and how the elites will, including some of our presidents, will use racist dog whistles, if you will, in order to pit minorities and the marginalized against the white working class and vice versa. Take a listen.
And one perfect example, I think a perfect example of how special interests and the powerful have pitted white working class Americans against brown and black working class Americans in order to just screw over all working class Americans, is Reaganism in the 80s when he started talking about welfare queens. Mm-hmm. So you think about this image, welfare queens, and what he was really trying to talk about was this, he was painting this photo, he was painting this like really resentful vision of essentially black women who were doing nothing, that were sucks on our country, right? And it's this whole tragedy of the commons type of thinking where it's like, because this one specific group of people that you are already kind of subconsciously primed to resent, you give them a different reason that's not explicit racism, but still rooted in a racist caricature. It gives people a logical reason to say, oh yeah, no, toss out the whole social safety net.
Yeah.
And then
so, like I said, it's honestly, that was brilliant. It's still crazy to me how people think that she isn't intelligent. She's clearly well read. She's clearly a thoughtful young woman, and she's done her research, and she is absolutely correct. Now, just to elaborate a little bit on the example of the quote-unquote welfare queen and what that really looks like and how it was used by Reagan. The reason she had to bring Reagan up is because the welfare queen idea really did come from him. Now, that story originated about a young woman named Linda Taylor. Now, Linda Taylor was a criminal, to say the least. And she did defraud government assistance programs. Now, the difference between Linda Taylor and the rest of the world is that Linda was very unique, and Linda was a multi-time criminal. Reagan talks about in her speech, and it's weird how much he focuses and harps on this particular case. And then she talks, remember, keep this in mind, she's talking about how elites try to distract us. Well, Linda Taylor did defraud the government. She also robbed people. She had a kidnapping case, and she was even connected to a murder case. So when I say this woman was the exception to the rule, she was the most unique exception to the rule of quote unquote welfare fraud or food stamp fraud, whatever you want to call it. But nonetheless, Reagan kept harping on it, because it was a useful distraction. In fact, it was such a good distraction that when she was being connected to murder, the police department was actually asked to stand down from the investigation because they didn't want it to distract away from the welfare queen story that the government had been using. Now, some idiot named Craig Shirley tried to come at AOC in brilliant fashion that she usually does. She hit him with a little clapback. He says that there is no evidence of AOC ever picking up a book on President Reagan. If so, she would not know that he was the president who signed an order creating Dr. Martin Luther King's holiday. Ooh. Okay, let's continue. She said, okay, great. Now talk about Reagan and the Iran-Contra conflict, the gutting of our mental health system, the explosion of homelessness under his watch, and the crack epidemic. You can also talk about HIV and AIDS, and the demonization of the LGBTQ community, union busting, and ending the fairness doctrine, which launched the polarized media environment we're suffering from today. I mean, she's right, you know, and it's interesting that this man gave her an opportunity to actually observe all the things Ronald Reagan was distracting us from. And not only Ronald Reagan, by the way, the elites. And it needs to be understood that Ronald Reagan was a puppet. And I don't know if a lot of people know that. He was a puppet in the strict, I mean, the dude just wanted to be loved and adored. He was an actor. He was a professional actor. His handlers, the neocons who were running it, he was so far out of the loop. He wasn't even responsible for his own decision making. Now, that doesn't mean Reagan wasn't a racist, but it does mean that, well, whenever Reagan finally did get a voice and he finally did have time to harp on something, he would do it because behind the scenes, his puppet masters were doing things like she said, the Iran-Contra conflict. There's a number of reasons why he wanted to distract the masses. I want to talk about the AIDS epidemic that was actually going on while all this was happening. AIDS was a very serious problem, and it first got discovered or first discussed in front of the administration in a press conference. And it was because of an outbreak in Atlanta that it was like 1 in every 3 people were dying. This was becoming a very serious problem very fast. And Reagan's press secretary laughed about it, didn't do anything about it. Moving forward, there were more press conferences, laughed about it. Hundreds of thousands of lives later, Reagan finally gave a speech on it. It was kind of half-hearted. 6 years later. I don't know if you all recall, but Hillary Clinton even had to apologize for painting Nancy Reagan as some type of hero when it comes to fighting HIV and AIDS. So that was one thing. The Cold War was also going on at the same time. A lot of people, it's kind of hard to make all of these connections, but the Cold War was going on at the same time. Alongside the Cold War, a bunch of stuff in the Middle East because of the Cold War. Now, what people don't talk about when they talk about Reagan's Bring Down the Wall speech is everything that happened before that. I think the Bring Down the Wall speech was in 1991, something like that, 90 or 91. Gorbachev, no, I apologize. I think the Bring Down the Wall speech was like 89, 90. So, but the wall came down in 91. Gorbachev and Reagan were damn near friends. As quickly as the Cold War ramped up as far as the development of nuclear weapons and ballistic missiles, they were about to end all missile production. But Reagan got a little ahead of himself and his handlers yanked him back. And on the day that they were supposed to sign the treaty that would have ended all production of nuclear weapons and would have effectively ended the Cold War, not only then, but even now, would have built up trust with Russia, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We would be in an entirely different situation. The day that he was supposed to do that, his handlers told him no. And so we were, like I said, effectively still in the Cold War because Reagan refused to just sign a treaty that said that he agreed to previously about denuclearizing and getting rid of all ballistic missiles. Now, specifically focusing on the poor or working class, productivity and wage earnings started to diverge because of the Reagan era. This is what most people would blame on, you guessed it, trickle-down economics. That has never worked for literally anybody. It will work for the rich. I lied. It worked for the rich. It worked really, really well for the rich. But it wasn't working for the government. In fact, Social Security was being robbed. It was being robbed by Reagan because trickle-down economics wasn't work. I believe he took some to the tune of 2.7, roughly, give or take a percentage of that, or point 1 million or so. Was roughly 2.7 million though. Took that from Social Security, said that it was going to go into, or excuse me, let me reverse. He took it from people by raising the payroll tax. Yeah, your Republican friend did that. The conservative, the fiscal conservatism, Reaganomics, trickle down. So we got hit over the head with a payroll tax. But it was passed under the guise that it would go into Social Security. However, it never made it into Social Security. And in fact, that surplus was spent by both Reagan and Bill Clinton on various affairs overseas and in South America. And then also, of course, it was used to cover up the debt that we were accruing in the Treasury. But it was okay. It never really got out. Well, I'm not going to say it didn't get out. But it never really went through a proper audit because Reagan's guy Greenspan was the one who was in charge of the Treasury. But so people were pissed about taxes, right? Instead of blaming the guy who actually raised your taxes, the fiscal conservative, you want to blame the person you think is stealing your tax money. But ironically enough, it was Reagan stealing their tax money the entire time. He was probably also distracting from the Iran-Contra conflict. Like I said, we were hurting for money. The Iran-Contra deal was what, selling weapons to Iran? Yeah, we were selling weapons to Iran because Iran was our ally at one point. But because of an embargo that was put on them, I think actually because of us, because of all the problems that we started with Iran, we weren't supposed to sell them those weapons. But they used to be our biggest arms. We used to deal arms with them more than anybody else. They were our original Israel. And then after that, we sold those weapons, got the money, and then gave them to the Contras in Nicaragua. Obviously, that was totally illegal. We violated a lot of treaties and we violated an embargo to do that. But, we can't worry about things like that when you're Americans, when you're being told that Miss Linda Taylor, the welfare queen, is stealing your money. You got to worry about those things. We get pitted against each other regularly. We don't fall for it as easily as we used to, but some people still do. There are certain truisms that people believe in because their parents believed in it and because their parents were lied to. Because the people that are around them, their parents believed in it and their friends and the people around them were lied to also. And what this guy is attempting to do, by the way, is pretend that because Ronald Reagan passed MLK Day, like what? That means you're not racist? Lyndon B. Johnson was literally known as a connoisseur of the N-word. And he passed the 13th, he passed what? The Civil Rights Amendment, not the 13th, 14th, I think the 15th, 14th and 15th Amendments? Don't quote me on that. He didn't pass all three though. But he did pass the Civil Rights Act that he called the N-word bill. So don't give me that nonsense because and at least that was something that was practical. Like it actually could be used, giving us a national holiday for MLK Day so you can what? Help us forget that y'all murdered him or the government conspired to murder him as found guilty in the case in 1999. Like, really? That's why? I don't, that's what I'm saying. Like, you telling me you can't be racist because maybe to shield, like the dude crack era, right? Crack era, welfare queen nonsense, was trying to get rid of welfare programs. By the way, the welfare programs that actually mostly benefited white people. This is true. Mostly benefited white people in the South. But if you could blame Linda Taylor, who, by the way, on her census, it says that her and the family she was birthed to are all white, that she was mixed with Native American blood, Therefore, because of the unique, she was extremely light, but had different hair texture that she could manipulate to seem like she's mixed black, like she's a Jewish woman, and she did that in order to commit her crimes. So she wasn't even a quote unquote black woman, but Reagan portrayed her as such in order to manufacture consent that the black people are the ones causing all the problems for the white working class, not his irresponsible presidency and his disaster of an administration. Had to be the black people. So it was great. I love the takedown. You brought up a very good point, and it once again allowed us to have a conversation about exposing these lies that have kept the white working class and minorities fighting over stupid, nonsensical I don't say bullshit, but it's kind of bullshit. And the bullshit was started by the elites. They're our enemy, not each other. We are not each other's enemies. It has always been them. But they are worried because the white working class outnumbers us, like realistically. And they know that if you all revolt, then it's over. We revolt, they can try to smack us down in various ways because we don't have a fighting demographic. We don't even have a voting dominated. We don't even have voting dominance. So we don't have electoral advantage. We do in a Democratic primary, but that's almost where it's, in local elections, yeah. But like federally, there's very little we can do if we all pulled our vote together, like with Obama with a 99%. But that's about it. So that's why it's so important for us to stick together and be each other's allies. So I'm once again glad AOC brought that up. Thank you for watching that segment of Mi Casa es Su Casa. Help us reach our goal of 500 patrons. You can do so by donating as little as $1 by clicking on the Patreon link in the description below. Don't forget, join us on Roku and JustNForm. You can follow us on Twitter and Facebook as well. And remember, more than anything else, find your balance. Peace.